I went into Final Fantasy XV with very low expectations 3 years ago. The reason why my expectations were so low is because I've heard so many bad things about this game online. I'm not a devout Final Fantasy fan, but from what I've gathered, the fans have been waiting for the release of 15 for many years. The game started as a spin-off title for Final Fantasy named Final Fantasy XIII Versus, then they decided to make it into a mainline Final Fantasy game. Over the years there were lots of teasers, trailers, etc. With every media released from Square Enix for this game, fans' expectations were rising higher and higher to the point where I think the game was really close to hitting those unrealistic No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk levels of expectations. And we all know how those levels of expectations can never be met no matter how good the game ends up being. However, as an outsider, I picked this game up thinking it's going to be pretty bad, but after I finished this game, I thought with all of its flaws, it is still absolutely phenomenal. Now I know it's an unpopular opinion, but it's an honest one, and I will explain why I feel this way about this game. A little disclaimer, in this video I'm playing the Windows edition of this game. First I want to bring up how good this game looks. Luminous Engine looks great, the game looks clean and crisp. It has these big open zones with modern style buildings, cars and roads, as well as mythical creatures and locations. This game has a very interesting mix of both modern style and fantasy. And I think that's a very strong artistic statement that the game makes, and I love it. You don't see it very often, people living their normal everyday lives, going to work in a factory, driving a car, enjoying an evening in a restaurant, wearing very normal modern clothes. But you also have magic, swords that appear out of nowhere, fantasy creatures, demons at night, and so on. This isn't another generic fantasy setting, like humans and orcs and dragons and what have you. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but in Final Fantasy XV, I really feel like I'm in a creative setting and a unique world. Let's transition from that and talk about the story. The game begins with a cutscene where Noctis' father, King Regis, sends Noctis and his friends on a mission to reach Altissia, a city that is in this time of war, maintain its political neutrality, sort of, in order to be wed to his childhood friend and the princess of Kingdom Tenebrae, Lunafreya. The explanation for that is pretty weak within the game, and the starting cutscene itself does not carry as much emotional weight as if the player had watched the movie Kingsglaive that Square Enix made prior to the release of this game. I don't want to talk about the movie a lot, but essentially it explains the conflict between the city of Insomnia and the Niflheim Empire, as well as the reason for Noctis and Lunafreya's wedding. It also shows that King Regis predicted his death before the Niflheim invasion. Having watched it, you understand not only the reason for the trip, but also why Regis is so anxious about letting his son go to Altissia and constantly interrupt his departure, because he knows that this is most likely the last time he's going to see his son Noctis.
Walk tall, my son.
There is also another piece of media that was released before the game itself, and it's a 5-episode anime series that depicts the backstories of your party members, Gladio, Ignis and Prompto. It's pretty good for being free, and it's nice to see why they are in this together with Noctis. However, there is one thing that I fail to understand. So Gladio and Ignis both very clearly bound by duty, and Prompto is just with them together? In this series it shows that he becomes friends with Noctis, but in comparison to Ignis and Gladio he has much lesser responsibilities it seems. But it's just a tiny nitpick. The big problem with the movie and the anime series is that it's fundamentally bad when a player has to go to a third-party platform and sometimes even pay to understand some of the plot. Now I get it. Some of the transitioning from Final Fantasy XIII Versus to the mainline game made these huge plot holes that needed to be filled. But it's still bad. In my opinion, this movie should have had a smaller budget and available for free, with both links to it and animated series put somewhere in the main menu of the game. Anyway, after the opening cutscene, the party's car breaks down, and you and your friends stop at the Hammerhead repair shop to fix it. You meet the owner of the shop, Sid, and his granddaughter, Cindy. While they are working on your car, you are asked to kill some monsters nearby, and the game introduces you to its combat. Before I gave this game a try, I was skeptical about the combat, because I've heard and read so many times that this game's combat is bland and you only need to hold an attack button during any fight. And having played this game 3 times over, I have to say that's the furthest thing from the truth. I'm not sure what those people are referring to, but this game's combat has surprising amount of depth to it. There's phasing, dodging, perfect phasing, mid-air phasing, aerial attacks, air hopping, blindside, link strikes, blindside links, warping, blocking, parrying, party techniques, input delays that result in alternative attacks, and you even get to control another party member, and each of them have their own moveset and abilities. Ignis is very potent and fast with his ice, fire or frost daggers. Gladio gets a shield and access to faster moveset for a greatsword since he is physically stronger than Noctis. And Prompto is all about guns and is very good at putting enemies into a vulnerable state. To be fair though, this feature was patched into the game later, It's still good nonetheless, since it allows for even more options mid-combat. Now, I'm not a fan of the magic system they decided to implement here. It is very satisfying to use, I have to say, but it's tied to a resource that you need to collect in the world, and there's only so many casts that you can do before you run out. Everything else is great though. I never got tired of combat in 15. I feel like I can always do better in the next fight or the fight after that. Maybe I can position myself better since some weapon attacks are tied to the distance between you and the enemies. Maybe fight some Ignis against some groups of enemies since he's good at it. You can also take advantage of enemies' weakness, for example, some enemies are weak to swords, some are weak to spears, some are weak to fire element, and so on. Also, if you find yourself in a tough fight, there is a chance that the game will allow you to summon an Astral. There are 6 of them for you to unlock throughout the game, and when you get the chance to summon them, it's always really fun to see them wreak absolute havoc on your enemies, and the spectacle is always great. Overall, in my opinion, the combat in Final Fantasy XV is probably one of the most underrated things about it. It has a little bit of a learning curve, but once you understand how it works, I think you'll have a really good time. Shortly after you get the car back, the party drives south to board the boat and set out to Altissia. There, they meet
a man of no consequence,
voiced beautifully by Darren DePaul. That's the main antagonist of the game, and at first he appears somewhat friendly, but nevertheless shady. His name is Ardyn, and I find him to be a pretty interesting villain, and I will talk about that later. After speaking with him, the party stays the night at the inn in the same place, only to wake up to realize that the events of Kingsglaive happened when they were sleeping. From this point on, there will be spoilers, so before I continue, I want to say that if you haven't played the game already, I would highly recommend that you do, because it's very much worth it. They read in every newspaper that the capital city is in ruins, the king is dead and the princess has gone missing. The news are crushing to the party, and here is where I want to talk about Noctis. At the beginning of the game, I found him to be pretty annoying. He acts like an impatient spoiled teenager, blames his father when he's supposed to take responsibility. He's moody, bratty and apathetic to the situation. And I think that was the intention. It takes him a long time to start acting like a king. Right now he's very much a fish out of water, being put in this position to him seemingly out of nowhere, and he's naturally frustrated and confused. That's why Ignis and Gladio were appointed to him as his close accomplices. They are more mature and realistic individuals that help Noctis down his difficult path. And I think this connection is pretty cool. The party decides to go back to the ruined Insomnia, but shortly after they are told to stick with the plan by their superior, Core. He's in this game a little bit, and go to Altissia. You can do a lot of things in the open world. Do side quests, hunts, dungeons, collect royal arms, grind experience, etc. The way you earn XP is done how you would usually expect in an RPG like this, but the way you go about it is a little different. After finishing a battle with enemies, you see your party earn experience based on the difficulty of the encounter. But you don't have this experience just yet. This is just what you and your party accumulated. To actually get this experience, the party needs to sleep. Camping is free and will get you 100% of the accumulated experience. The lodging, however, costs money and will get you experience above 100%, depending on the type of the resting place. Sleeping in a caravan is pretty cheap and rewards you with 120% of the accumulated experience. Hotels cost 300 gil and reward you with 150% of the experience. Luxurious places like Golden Cay cost 10,000 to rest in and reward 200% experience. And there is also a heavy priced 30,000 gil hotel suite that provides 300% experience bonus. I love this. This makes me take a strategic approach when it comes to leveling up my party. Should I stay longer and do more quests? Should I kill more demons at night because I know if I do that, the value of XP will get higher? Should I focus more on earning gil now since those hotels can be pretty expensive? I haven't played the game with this feature and honestly I really enjoy it. It will keep you occupied because there are a lot of things and activities to do until the main story quest will take you to Altissia. And here is where we can see the results of a messy development. Because while you are doing all of this stuff that you're used to in the open world, the game flips the switch on you. The moment you set out to Altissia, from that point on, Final Fantasy XV becomes a linear game. No more open world, only scripted set pieces and story from now on. This is of course a valid criticism of the game. The switch is pretty 0 to 100 I would say, and having played this game 3 times I would recommend that you farm some experience before departing. But if you ask me, I don't think this is that big of a deal. Because the story from this point picks up a lot and I love everything about the post-open world part of the game. You get to Altissia and I have to say this is the most beautiful city ever to be put in a video game. Clearly inspired by the city in Italy, Venice, the location expands further on established open world building. As I said before, Altissia is somewhat politically neutral, and it reflects in its design. It does not have the simplistic design of Duscae, nor does it have the industrial look of Niflheim. It's easy to connect the dots as to why the city looks this way. It's built on water because it's home to an astral named Leviathan. I can only imagine how much time it took them to make assets and design this city. They did not waste development time on Altissia, and oh my god does it pay off. It looks stunning. From the calming gondola rides to the breathtaking views, it's easy to see that devs were clearly inspired and put their soul into it. And some people still say that video games are not art. Shortly after their arrival, Niflheim attacks, just like you and the Secretary of Altissia predicted. Lady Lunafreya is there to ask Leviathan to give power to Noctis. He is being an asshole about it and initially refuses. Lunafreya convinces him to offer power on a condition that Noctis will have to prove himself. Then Ardyn shows up, stabs Lunafreya while being smug about it, and leaves. With what strength Luna has left, she gives it to Noctis so he can fight Leviathan and obtain his power. This boss fight is really cool spectacle-wise, not so much gameplay-wise. You fly around using your godlike powers and the boss does not pose any real threat. Which isn't an issue in my book since the game overall isn't about difficulty, especially in story moments like that. This is one of the high points of the game. It moves the story forward and generally are a visual feast for the player. After the fight, Noctis receives Leviathan's power and Lunafreya dies. The young prince passes out and has a dream/vision of him talking to Lunafreya for the last time. This cutscene depicts the death of Luna and beautifully demonstrates how emotionally mature Luna is compared to Noctis. That's why he is being portrayed as a child and Luna is shown to be a grown woman. And I cannot help but to get emotional here every time I replay the game. Speaking of high points, I cannot believe I haven't talked about one thing just yet: the soundtrack. The composer for Final Fantasy XV is Yoko Shimomura, and my god did she outdid herself. I haven't seen a case such as this where the game's quality is dramatically improved just by the soundtrack alone. As a musician myself who has been behind the piano for 19 years, I see music as an essential part of most video games. For example, how many times have you played the game where you played unreasonably aggressive because the music pumped you up for it? Final Fantasy XV knows perfectly what music to provide and at what points. It highlights the epic and ground encounters, chilling and relaxing open world exploration, sad moments of grief and loss and story, and so on. This is probably the best part of the game. How good the melody is, how well it's written, how well it regulates your emotion during the game. I only wish I could talk to Ms. Shimomura and pick her brain about the creative process, what directions for the music she was given, and so on. What else is there to say? Listen to the soundtrack yourself. I only wish that the music in Final Fantasy XVI will be as good as this. They have a lot of work to do if that's the case. After the cutscene, Noctis wakes up in what looks like a hotel room with a ring of Lucius in his hand and is greeted by Ignis, who is now blind. He quickly writes it off as a
small sacrifice in the greater battle.
His injury is explained in his DLC, and this is actually very important because this DLC makes Ignis objectively the most important companion in the party. During the events in Altissia, Ignis gets separated from the rest of the party and goes out looking for Noctis in the city ruins. You team up with Lunafreya's brother Ravus, fight some Imperial forces and eventually reach an altar where Noctis and Luna are lying unconscious. Seeing Luna dead, Ravus goes nuts and tries to kill Noctis, blaming his sister's death on him. Ignis is of course trying to stop him and they enter into a fight. After the fight, Ravus comes to his senses, but then Ardyn appears, disguised as Gladio of all characters. Ravus sees through his bullshit, but it does not help, and both Ignis and Ravus are forced to watch as Ardyn attempts to kill Noctis. Ignis then sees the ring of Lucia on the ground, and decides to use it to save Noctis from Ardyn. Usually the ring can only be used by people with royal blood. But sometimes the gods will grant its power to a wearer that they find worthy, usually for a price. Ignis then uses his super anime powers granted by the ring and successfully repels Ardyn. In this case, they have granted the power of kings to Ignis, but at the cost of his eyes. Now, as much as I love this DLC, this content should have been in the main game due to the sheer importance of these events to the story. Other companion DLCs just expand on already established characters. For example, Gladio's DLC is all about him going on a side quest to get more power to protect Noctis and become more confident. Prompto goes on an adventure of self-discovery in his origins, but here, Ignis not only saves Noctis' life once, but twice all on his own. This is absolutely should have been in the main game. Following the events of Altissia, the group finds itself emotionally devastated, but still pushes onwards and takes a train to the capital city of Niflheim Empire in order to reach the crystal that Noctis needs to interact with in some way to reclaim Insomnia. Gladio copes with the tragedy the only way he knows how, and that's to essentially suck it up and move on. Then he forces his mentality on a traumatized Noctis. This, in my opinion, fleshes out characters more. Although I think Gladio is mostly right in this situation, the way he goes about it is wrong. He's trying to give his friend some tough love here, but he does not let Noctis go through the grief that he requires. This shows Gladio's flaws, and I think it's done pretty well. The train takes a stop at the station and the group takes a little excursion to the swamp below the station to retrieve a royal arm for Noctis. This is an important section because the story is being integrated into the gameplay here. Because Ignis lost his vision, you have to tread slowly so he can catch up with the rest of the party. You can't help but to feel bad when running up ahead or doing anything else than slow walking. I also love the fact that you get an opportunity to camp here. Ignis has always been the party's cook. Every time you camp anywhere, he cooks for you. If you have enough ingredients, you can order any food if you have the recipe for it. Here, if you camp, Ignis will not cook for you, obviously because he can't see, so you resort to eating sad canned food or cup noodles. This actually hit me more than slow walking in the area, and I think it's a nice touch. You reach the end of the swamp, fight a boss, retrieve a royal arm, and the party addresses the elephant in the room.
A moment.
Is everything okay?
It bloody well isn't. And I won't suffer this pointless bickering in silence any longer. Let's be frank. My vision hasn't improved, and probably won't. Yet in spite of this, I would remain with you all. To the very end.
Sorry, but I object. War is a matter of life and death.
I know full well! I won't ask you to slow down. If I cannot keep up, I will bow out. Locked. You are king. One cannot lead by standing still. A king pushes onward, always, accepting the consequences and never looking back. Gladio, Noct will take his rightful place, but only once he's ready.
Ignis, being the mom of the group, of course settles this argument. Mentally reinvigorated, the group hops back on the train and discusses the fact that the nights are getting longer. Longer nights mean more demons, and eventually only Eternal Night will remain. The train then gets attacked by the Empire, and Noctis together with Prompto have to defend it. The encounter is generally fun. You get to fight on the ground as well as in the air to stop the airships from pursuing the train. After you're done with that, Ardyn disguises as Prompto and tricks Noctis into knocking him off the train. The real Ardyn then knocks Noctis out and disappears.
How long were you in the dark?
After regaining consciousness, Noctis delivers bad news about Prompto to the others, but the group decides to move on without him since it would endanger everyone on the train, plus the chances of finding him would be pretty slim. While making it back to the cabin, you fight off some demons, emphasizing the fact that the demons are so bold now that they have started appearing even during daytime. The train then stops at Tenebrae and we see the destruction that the Empire caused. Here, I always wonder how would Tenebrae look like if the game didn't go through rewrites. It would be really cool to see Tenebrae come to life by the same people who made also glorious Altissia. Anyway, the group decides to drop people off here for the sake of their safety and continue on their own. You are now truly on your own in the train. Seeing how many passengers were on the train in the beginning and now comparing it to the absolute empty cabins. This, combined with inevitable eternal nights, sells this feeling of a doomsday scenario to me. The train is then forcibly stopped by one of the Astrals, Shiva. She explains to him a lot of lore about the old world, Astrals, and reveals that she was Lunafreya's familiar all these years and was always by her side encouraging her. After that, the ghost of Luna appears before Noctis for a couple seconds and he helplessly reaches out for her, emphasizing that he still isn't ready yet. He is still clinging to the past and not fully accepting the reality yet. Nevertheless, the train keeps moving but eventually stopped right before the capital of Niflheim due to another demon attack. Ready to defend himself, Noctis tries to conjure his weapons like he always did in the past, but this time they are stuck. Yes, they added this weird MacGuffin, you can't use your weapons here. How do you know this? Well, the prompt tells you that Ardyn disabled your weapons. Of course, this is pretty poorly done and is designed to make you feel helpless in this scenario. The team then abandons the train and drives to the city in the trusty regalia. The car takes a beating from city defenses and eventually breaks down, forcing you to enter the keep on foot. Shortly after, Noctis gets separated from Gladio and Ignis and has to venture on his own. With no weapons, Noctis resorts to using the Ring of Lucius. This is generally a pretty fun weapon. You get to explode your enemies by shrinking them to death or outright delete them from existence. This section in the Citadel is pretty boring overall, but essentially you reunite with Ignis and Gladio, rescue Prompto and make it to the last room where the crystal is being held at. The party is absolutely swarmed by demons, and it's announced that the doors to the room with the crystal will be closing soon. This forces the group to cover for Noctis so he can make it to the crystal. There, Noctis reaches out for the crystal asking for help, but instead begins to get sucked inside. Then Ardyn appears and tells Noctis his real name.
Ardyn Lucis Kylum is my proper name.
Revealing that he is the brother of the very first Founder King, making him more than 2000 years old. Here is where I want to explain why I find Ardyn a pretty interesting villain. In his DLC and the animated episode, it's explained that 2000 years ago he was a very altruistic character, always trying to help people in need. He is granted the power by the crystal to heal people of his land of the plague that turns them into demons by absorbing the demonic essence into himself. During that time, the people believed that the crystal is to announce the name of the first king. Everyone assumed that Ardyn is to become the king, since he has such giving and caring personality. He is also in the serious relationship with the oracle named Era. It all seems like they are on their way to live the life of their dreams. One as a rightful ruler with an oracle by his side guiding his hand. Ardyn's brother, Somnus, announces that the crystal has spoken and Ardyn is to become the king. However, it was all done by Somnus to trick his brother into coming to the throne room. It is revealed that Somnus was quite jealous of his brother's powers and popularity among the people at the time. He tells Ardyn that the crystal did not actually choose him, but instead Somnus is to become the first ruler, the Founder King. He then attacks Ardyn, they exchange blows but Somnus emerges victorious, stabbing Ardyn in the chest. Era then runs to Ardyn only to unfortunately end up in the way of Somnus's blade. Ardyn takes this very well and unleashes the darkness that he was absorbing from people all this time. Devastated, Ardyn tries to commune with the crystal just to confirm that he wasn't in fact chosen to be king. Crystal then rejects Ardyn, confirming his fears. Somnus then decides to lock Ardyn away forever, erases his name from all records in hopes that he will never return. From now on, anyone who has rank high enough in the royal guard is to refer to Ardyn as Adagium. Even future kings will not know his real name. 2000 years later, the Empire finds Ardyn in the Isle of Angelgard, a place to be deemed sacred among Lucians. He allies with the Empire in an attempt to siege Insomnia, the royal city. Given his powers, he single-handedly wrecks the place and eventually reaches the main gates, where he is greeted by none other than King Regis, the father of yet unborn Prince Noctis. They enter into a flashy fight at the end of which Regis is apprehended, and just when Ardyn is about to get his revenge, the god Bahamut interferes and stops Ardyn from killing the king. He then explains that the gods want Ardyn to play a different role, to spread darkness across the world so that the chosen king Noctis can eventually dispel it. He is then understandably frustrated with the gods, but has no choice but to submit to their will and carry on with the plan that the gods intended for him. That's why I like his character. He isn't the villain of the story. The gods are. They orchestrated the whole thing with Noctis and Ardyn being just pieces on the chessboard to them. It is also explained that the gods, especially Bahamut, don't care whatsoever for the individual lives of mortals. The same Bahamut explains to Noctis in the present day that he also must sacrifice himself in order to save the world, but only when he is ready. In order to gain that power and banish darkness, Bahamut puts Noctis in a long sleep in the same island that Ardyn was kept in. Noctis then awakens as an adult and gets instructed to reach Hammerhead and makes his way to the mainland. He observes the ever-prevalent night as well as demons that are running rampant around the abandoned settlements. On his way to Hammerhead, he sees a car driving towards him, the driver of which is none other than Talcott, a boy Noctis met even before sailing to Altissia. He of course can't believe it at first, but Talcott then explains that 10 years have passed since Noctis have been absorbed by the crystal and it's been nothing but nighttime. After arriving at Hammerhead, Noctis reunites with his pals, and I have to say, this is an extremely underwhelming exchange. It might have been minutes for Noctis, but for the rest of the group it has been 10 years. And the only thing they have to say is...
Noct! It's you! It's really you! hadn't realized.
Well, well. You kept us waiting.
I don't know what went wrong here, honestly. Anyways, the party goes back to the ruins of Insomnia with new and fancy royal garbs, ready to take what is rightfully theirs. The city zone is pretty big with lots of side quests to do, like killing high-level demons, eradicating whatever is left of the Empire inside the city, and so on. Ardyn is there to greet Noctis and his crew and displays the protecting wall around the citadel that he made. When you reach the citadel, you fight off Ardyn's pet, Cerberus, and after the fight, a giant swarm of demons surrounds the group. The ghost of Luna Freya appears for the last time to commune with the gods and ask them for help. All of the Astros appear to kill demons and break the wall that surrounds the citadel. Even Bahamut helps this time. Noctis says goodbye to Luna and the party finally enters the citadel. In the courtyard, Ardyn summons his enslaved god Ifrit, and I find this fight mildly interesting. You can't hurt him while he's on fire, so you have to look for openings. And the spectacle during the moments where Bahamut helps you weaken him and Shiva helps you finish him off is pretty awesome. You vanquish him and proceed inside. In the heart of the citadel lies this gauntlet of challenges that the group must overcome in order to reach the throne room. The challenges present themselves in the form of old kings of Lucius that the party has to defeat. The first one is the king with the moniker The Fierce, and at the end of the fight, Gladio finishes him off single-handedly, proving his resolve.
I've served as your shield through thick and thin. No matter what, I've got your back. Now and always.
The second challenge is the king, or should I say queen, the rogue. Prompto handles this one at the end. The last king, the mystic, is getting defeated by Ignis. After a flashy demonstration of teamwork, the team proceeds to the throne room, but not before one last request from Noctis.
Hold on a sec. Prompto, can I see your photos?
Yeah.
If you played the game, you know how cool this is and what it leads to. You can choose one picture that you saved on your adventures to take inside the throne room. After confronting Ardyn, you have a little exchange, after which he knocks your companions out, stating that
They have no place in this. The Battle of Kings. Come, Noctis.
By the way, inside the throne room there are these creepy corpses that Ardyn conjured. There is Luna Freya, King Regis and Nyx, the protagonist of the movie Kingsglaive. I thought it was a pretty cool detail. Anyways, you and Ardyn are fighting inside the city, with the spectacle of the fight getting more and more ridiculous. You first start fighting on the ground, then you both unleash your anime powers while flying through the city. Just like the Leviathan fight in the midsection of the game, it's all spectacle. The fight ends in the courtyard where Noctis finishes Ardyn off, and he says,
I will await you in the beyond.
He is referring to the place of Immaterium inside the crystal, the same place where both of them talked to the Bahamut in the past. This is where they need to finish it once and for all. With nothing stopping Noctis to sit on the throne, he says his final goodbyes to his friends. And this moment is great because considering how much time you spent with them throughout the game, and how well they got fleshed out, you really feel these farewells. And when it's time for him to receive the power to end Ardyn for good, he sits the throne and summons all kings of Lucius. With every king passing through his body, he feels weaker and weaker. The ghost of his father is also shown to be standing by him. He appears apathetic towards his son Pain, and that makes the scene even better. He is also the last king to give power to Noctis. You know that that's Regis by his appearance and the sword. He delivers the final blow to Noctis, transporting him inside the crystal. Ardyn is also there, waiting for Noctis. Here, even Ghost of Luna appears for a brief second to stave off Ardyn, and Noctis summons every king of Lucius to defeat Ardyn for good. His death is precise and quick, but so is Noctis. He dies shortly after. Credits roll, and after that there are 3 post-credit scenes. In the first one, you see the sun is rising in the world of Eos again for the first time in 10 years. In the second one, you see the party at the camp before setting out for Insomnia. Noctis thanks everyone for being there for him and calling them all...
You guys are the best.
Which they are, he's correct. And the last cutscene is this what if scenario, where Noctis sits the throne with Luna by his side and shows her the photo that you picked to bring with you before confronting Ardyn. I haven't seen a person keep their cool and not cry during this moment. We all did. It's a wonderful scene with a cool photo gimmick. And that's the story of Final Fantasy XV. With all of its flaws, I can't say that the final product is anything less than amazing. Yes, the side activities are a bit boring and some DLC's content should have been in the main game, some characters are underdeveloped, but what the game is doing well, it does really well. The combat is nowhere near as bad as people say it is. Highly emotional story, character designs, world building, and it's all accompanied by 11 out of 10 music. This game was clearly made with love and care, and I for one will be replaying it once in a while again and again. Also, chances are, Square Enix learned from the messy development of Final Fantasy XV, and now they are making Final Fantasy XVI with a clear vision in mind and no rewrites or redesigns. And if you ask me, I hope it will be just as good as Final Fantasy XV. Thanks for watching. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. This took me a while to make because this game means something to me. I hope you enjoyed it or maybe even thought about giving the game a second try. Please consider following me on Twitch. I stream almost every day and I just love interacting with viewers. So see you there and have a good one.
That's it!
What's what?
I've come up with a new recipe.
Can't wait to try it.